I'm Allison Jonjak, the Cranberry Outreach Specialist with the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension. These videos are the on-demand recordings of UW Extension and the Wisconsin State Cranberry Growers Association's virtual brown bag lunch series. These monthly sessions offer growers and researchers a way to share timely and relevant information. We hope you'll enjoy and continue to engage with us.
Hi, I'm Tom Lochner, the Executive Director of the Wisconsin State Cranberry Growers Association. We're excited to be a partner with Extension to bring you research-backed resources, tools, and tips to keep Wisconsin marshes productive and profitable.
And those are, as usual, if you've got questions, feel free to either unmute yourself and ask them directly or to type them into the chat. We go through questions with the presenters over the course of the presentation. There's also 10 minutes for questions at the end. We use the chat, and feel free to ask questions and answer them if you have answers as well. That'll be our final piece of housekeeping. All right. We're going to have today Jed, mostly Jed, focus on weeds and pre-harvest intervals. Amaya Atucha is going to cover water content and soil moisture. And then Dave Jones is going to be giving us the what's going on and what's upcoming. But I want to offer it to Alex to give us a quick welcome from the Growers Association.
All right, thank you, Allison. So welcome to you all on behalf of WSCGA, and thank you for joining us today. Tom is out on vacation, so I will be filling in for him today. I know we're all looking forward to another great brown bag lineup, and I think today's content is going to be great with your current activities on the marsh. And I'd like to also thank Allison for her help in planning out these brown bags and then all the work she does behind the scenes to coordinate and run these sessions. It's been wonderful. And today is our final session of our growing season brown bags. We do have our mini clinics coming up next month during our field day on August 11th. And again, Allison is working hard behind the scenes. She's organizing a marsh tour at Whittlesey Cranberry and our lineup of speakers for the mini clinics. I can put a link in the chat for the notice that includes all the information about the field day and the registration form if you want to join us for the lunch. And coming up here in September and October, we'll be taking a break from these mini clinics for the harvest season. And we'll be back in November and December, and Allison will give a preview of those brown bags later in the meeting. The last item I have for today is a feedback survey that we would like you to take on these brown bag seminars. We'll put the link in the chat, and we'd love your input on what you like about these brown bags, what improvements, if any, you would suggest, and what topics you'd like to see in future sessions. And we will do a random drawing of the responses for one of our Wisconsin Cranberries hats. So you'll have the opportunity to either leave your response anonymous if you'd like, or you can enter in your name if you want to be in the drawing for the hat. So that's everything I have today, Allison.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex. And thanks as always to the Growers Association for helping us coordinate these, to the education committee for helping us kind of suss out what makes good topics for what times of year, and to all of you for joining us. So feel free to, again, ask questions and all of that. Generally, we were going to have Amaya next, but her prior meeting is running long, and Dave generously volunteered to take the middle slot. So I will, Dave, hand it to you, and I will let you start sharing your screen.
Thanks, Allison.
There we go.
Let me share here.
Yeah, thanks for all of those, Jed. Yeah, it's been fun doing those crop safety plots. So it's been neat. All right, and then Dave has plenty of good updates from the field, and I expect lots of questions. So feel free either to unmute yourselves or to type them into the chat.
Okay, well, thank you for the invitation to speak today, guys. This is kind of the combined thoughts from myself as well as Christina. I'll be kind of sharing our 2 cents today, but before I get started, also a shout out, thank you to Pam as well as Suzanne, whom I chatted with this week, kind of gathered their thoughts and experience from the last month as well. So we'll get right into this. I'm going to start off today talking a little bit about some crop development, some of the horticultural comments or concerns we're seeing thus far. Going to chat a little bit through some insect topics, and we're going to finish off with a pathology update right at the end. So feel free to ask questions as I go. I'll probably wait to answer any questions until the end of the presentation. But yeah, like Allison said, please feel free to put them in the chat. So a few comments on crop development. In terms of where we're at in progression, central Wisconsin, we are more or less 100% out of bloom now on all sites and varieties. You do see a little bit of bloom cling into some Stevens here as the week comes to a close. on those real late sites, but that's a minority. Most places we are well out of bloom. Now, northern Wisconsin is out of bloom on modern hybrids, tail end of bloom on Stevens, but most of those are rapidly approaching being out as well, and they are thinking about pulling bees if they have not already in a lot of locations. In terms of growth and development of the vines themselves, one of the larger comments this year has been the lush growth across the state. We have a significant amount of growth. A lot of growers pulling the plug on fertilizer, 5 to 10 units or more under what they'd originally planned to do this year. And that has had to do with the fact that vines greened up and grew earlier and faster and more this year in spite of less nitrogen than a lot of growers had realized. And there's a couple of reasons this likely happened. First off, the soils warmed up really quick this past spring. So if everyone remembers back to that brutal June heat wave we had where it was 95 plus degrees, we had soil temperatures in the 60s very early this year. And so the microbial community was probably breaking down organic matter, releasing that into this, that available ammonium into the soil, which certainly would have supplemented some of the cranberry vines' needs this year. And secondly, we have had a number of lightning storms move through Wisconsin in the last 3 to 4 weeks. A lot of farms have had 5, 6, 7 pretty good storm systems drop a couple inches of rain on them in 3 to 4 weeks. And as most here are aware, lightning does fix atmospheric nitrogen into nitrates, which are then deposited into the soil and converted over into ammonium through microbial processes. So both of those two processes probably contributed quite a bit of nitrogen at many marshes, which led to some overgrowth in spite of growers dialing down the rate. So something a lot of folks are a little concerned about right now. Berry counts. We'll probably start thinking about counting berries in central Wisconsin in a week or two. Berries are still deciding whether or not they're not going to hang on or not at quite a few places. So it is a little bit early to start doing berry counts, but certainly by early August, we may start thinking about doing some counts. Pam covered the early bloom window and the mid bloom window last time, but the remainder of bloom for the state in general, we had a pretty warm bloom. Certainly a few days sprinkled in there where it wasn't quite as warm or sunny, but generally speaking, we had a pretty nice bloom window in most regions of the state this year, and bee activity has been reported to be quite strong. Certainly better than many years, that's for sure. One comment in terms of the development of the crop that we did want to mention, this was mentioned by both Pam and Suzanne as well. Watch your pre-harvest intervals, particularly on your early varieties this year. Based on current berry development, we wouldn't be surprised to see some of our earlier varieties move into that harvest range a few days earlier than a typical year this year. Certainly, it would be something to at least consider and try to plan for just in case. A lot can happen between now and then, but we may see some of those earlier varieties ready in that like 10th, 11th, 12th range of September in central Wisconsin. So being cautious with those materials, especially as we think about all that great material Jed shared, as well as flea beetle control, being mindful of those timings, and even considering in certain situations you may want to skip some of those very early beds, maybe potentially your hybrids or your crimson queens, that kind of thing. Okay, moving over into our insect topics. Wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about flea beetle, of course. It is flea beetle season. We did find the first pretty consistent flea beetle statewide this past week. Numbers have certainly ticked up. Historical hotspots on marshes are up into that 10 to 20 per sweep set range, but this is not typically consistent across marshes yet. We are still in that early window. And I would emphasize most marshes are still well below a threshold. A rough threshold at a bed level would be about 20 flea beetles per sweep set, but this can be a bit tricky because, as most folks are aware, flea beetle distribution is notoriously spotty across beds. And can be very highly variable. But in general, most marshes are still well below that threshold. It will build in coming weeks and starting to kind of get geared up for plans depending on pressure on the marsh. Many growers will be keeping an eye on numbers bed to bed and will address hotspots as opposed to spraying the entire marsh. And that brings up kind of the general point, this just comes down to working closely with your scout, whoever that may be, and most folks already do, but we have a very limited number of options for flea beetle at this point in time, really not a lot of materials that can be deployed, limited a number of diazon applications per year, et cetera. So knowing exactly what those numbers are each week in each bed is very valuable because it allows you to, of course, understand your overall pressure, but it also provides the opportunity to potentially spot treat beds or spot treat one bed and the two adjacent, as opposed to treating the entire marsh and using up an application of one of those precious materials for the whole property. Okay, moving over to fruitworm and sparg. Flight of sparg and fruitworm, particularly sparg, seems to be winding down this week. We are noticing a significant decline in sparg numbers in our traps in the last 7 days. Properties that had 70 plus sparg last week, we were finding as low as single digits this week in a lot of cases. So flight does really seem to be winding down for the year. Fruitworm numbers are also starting to decline, not quite as significantly as sparg in most places, but certainly down. It looks like both of these pests are starting to wind down for the season at most properties. In general, to kind of talk about what the flight for these two looked like this year and how that affected control, we feel they've been relatively synchronous this year. It seemed as though they started peaking at about the same time. There was not a lot of division on how the two behaved, and they both seem to have started declining at relatively similar time, although like I mentioned, sparg seems to be declining a little bit faster than fruitworm at most properties right now. The nice thing about that synchronized flight is that growers seem to have gotten very good control this year. Of course, growers are able to apply insecticides as a function of their percent out of bloom per their weekly scouting reports and discussion with their consultant. Growers that put their application out at the right phenological timing appear to have gotten very good control this year for both pests, which is great news. A lot of growers did only have to treat for fruitworm and sparg one time this year. In a year where we have a prolonged tail end of flight, or there's a big split in when the two flights peak and start to decline, many operations are forced to do two, just to cover that full window. But this year, we did have quite a few growers that are able to get away with just the one application, particularly one application of Alticor was fairly common. Okay, blunt-nosed leafhopper. Certainly want to spend a little time talking about the general situation with this pest. The good news on blunt nose this year is that growers who used a pre-bloom organophosphate, as we expected, we have seen excellent control. In fact, we've really struggled to find nymphs or adults of these properties still, if we have found any at all. And in most cases, we have found zero, nothing, since the application was made before bloom. So this is excellent news. It's certainly what we assumed we would find based on work done out east, but it's still nice to have that confirmation. Adult leafhoppers are observed for the first time in late June, mostly here at marshes that did not use that pre-bloom organophosphate. At this point in time, if you find blunt-nosed leafhopper, rather than that top right picture of the nymph, they're probably going to be an adult, bottom right picture there. We are finding almost exclusively adults now, but there still are a few late instar nymphs sprinkled into the catch. Egg laying is probably underway at marshes that have adults right now. And the reason that is worth noting is that last year, even growers that did spray almost right after bloom for a larger population, we did still find nymphs at those properties the following year, which means that if you have some adults right now, there's a pretty good chance that those things will manage to lay some eggs before you treat them, or if you don't choose to treat them because you have a low number, good bet that you may find some eggs out there next year. So if you know that you had adult leafhoppers this year, definitely a good idea to mark the area of the marsh that you found them and have your scout, whoever that may be, certainly keep a close eye on those beds in subsequent years, just to monitor for egg hatch in the future. Some growers are going to choose to treat. Just as a reminder, of course, I know that there's some good work on this subject ongoing through Allison there, but experience last year does tell us that we do have 3 materials available to us that all delivered very strong knockdown of pretty large populations of blunt-nosed leafhopper last year, those being Ectera, Imidan, and Diazinon. Those 3, when used last year on pretty large populations, did appear to very rapidly knock the numbers down. Just as a reminder for all you ocean spray growers, that Ectera does carry a code book restriction for 45 days for both EU and non-EU fruit. Okay, I'm going to finish off here before I open it up for questions with a brief pathology update. We hope that it stays this way, but thus far it's been relatively quiet on the pathology front this year. The first thing to mention is that TSV and blueberry shock symptoms, very, very easy to find out there right now. There's so much renovation going on in Wisconsin right now and so many young beds. In general, we're noticing the general pattern that we're seeing a lot of TSV and shock in younger beds of the modern hybrids. That's something we've seen a lot of this year. In fact, so much so that these prematurely reddened berries, particularly ones that have sized a bit, are easily mistaken for fruitworm and sparg from the edge of the bed. Generally speaking, when we walk in and inspect the fruit, it has pretty consistently been TSV or shock as opposed to fruitworm and sparg. As a reminder, if you're walking in to inspect for yourself, the prematurely red fruit can happen due to the viruses or due to fruitworm sparg feeding. But if you split those berries open and they're hollowed out or filled with frass, especially if you see entry or exit holes, pretty easy to parse out that that was an insect. Whereas if the fruit is sound, no entry, exit holes, no frass, and you see that characteristic scarring, fairly distinctive. And most growers are well aware of what that looks like at this point in time. Bacterial stem gall, or canker, if you prefer, has been relatively low this year. Picture there taken this year in the bottom right of some stem gall. Up north in the northeast part of the state, there were a few beds that I was in earlier this year that had some, but generally speaking, this has not been a banner year for stem gall. For anyone that does have it, just as a reminder, there's really no pesticide-based solution for this issue. The bacterium is just entering plants through natural wounding, either through harvest or potentially ice heaving. Basically, the best thing to do is to sand the bed, help that vine root out in front of the canker or stem gall symptoms. But overall, low incidence this year. Not a lot of fruit rot observed yet. It is still early, long way to go between now and harvest. And something that's going to be kind of interesting just to observe this year is, on the one hand, we had a very warm, dry bloom for the most part. And so the hope there would be perhaps that the dry conditions and the extreme heat would limit fungal pathogens. But on the other hand, bloom this year moved so fast that quite a few growers did feel that they were late on their timings. They felt that they missed the appropriate timing. So we will kind of see how that affects the overall incidence of fruit rot that we see this year. But thus far, we're not seeing a tremendous amount. We'll certainly be keeping an eye on that in coming weeks, though. Early rot, it is visible out in affected beds now, and as we typically see, it is found mostly in young beds during the establishment phase. This pathogen really does seem to do particularly well in young beds where high levels of nitrogen are being deployed and growth is very lush and soft, a lot of runner production. If you suspect you have early rot, as always, do please make sure you consult your consultant, or for you ocean spray growers, feel free to contact me or anyone else and come out and take a look at it and provide a diagnosis, as well as chat over some potential solutions. And finally, cotton ball. Very minimal amounts of this disease, certainly some historical hotspots. We did find a little bit of cotton ball this year, but really have not seen a tremendous amount of this disease so far this year either. It's been a fairly quiet one. Okay, that is kind of our spin through the growing season or field issues since Pam provided that last update. Certainly more than happy to answer any questions now. And I guess I'll stop sharing my screen here so you can have it back, Allison.
Sounds good. I will get my PowerPoint back up, but do please ask questions. I believe Amaya is on the way, popping in from her prior meeting, but Dave has been around and seen lots of things about any time I say how is this going, oh, Dave will be out tomorrow, so pretty much you name it, Dave's seen it, so feel free to take advantage of his knowledge here.
Thanks, Allison.
And as we may make sure I'm still seeing the chat. I guess some questions that I will ask then in the absence of questions from the audience. We've been seeing nearly nothing on the pathogens front. As you let me formulate a good question. I had heard of one instance of someone who had what seemed to be a fertilizer question, but we're looking at it closer. It seems in kind of a markedly different vine color and earlying period, and also that it was kind of expanding every year, that we determined maybe this is less likely to be a nutrient question, more likely to be a cultivar contamination. What are you using as kind of your process for when I see something that I'm surprised by? How do I start thinking about what it might be? Like, what kind of questions do you ask when you first see someone say, hey, I have vines that look funny, you know, is this fertilizer? What do you look at?
Sure. Well, that's a great question. I mean, I think one of the first things that we would look for immediately would be fruiting bodies. One thing that very often separates physiological damage from pathological damage is that you will often see fruiting bodies or sporulation of the causative pathogen. Or if in the absence of fruiting bodies, like for example, in the case of Protoventuria, you can see the mycelial growth across the leaf or lesions, something of that effect. So the second thing that we would often ask about is the age of the bed. You know, when you talk about like cultivar contamination, that's something that we often see in very old beds, often mowed on site or of questionable origin. Growers aren't quite sure where it came from. Yeah, there'd be a situation where you might suspect potential contamination of either rogue vines or seedlings that came up. And, you know, we also, another common one is we'll often look for potential spot treatment injury or herbicide injury, looking for physiological deformation of the leaves in absence of fruiting bodies or any other key diagnostic feature for a pathogen. So typically those are the three of at least the big things that you'd walk through immediately and walking into a bed as you kind of check through the potential options. And certainly brown spots or issues in a bed can be caused by other factors, including insect damage as well. So looking for feeding or chewing damage is another key part of the process. And then, for example, something like bacterial stem gall, which can cause a rapid collapse of the bed, leading to browned off spots, looking at the juncture between the upper part of the stem and the roots, looking for bacterial stem galls, looking for girdler damage. So examining the full plant, looking for symptoms and signs, and then asking some questions about the herbicide history as well as the age of the bed would all be kind of steps to that process for us.
Awesome. That's really insightful. It kind of helps a person consider everything that might be. I'm still not seeing any questions in the chat. So Amaya, if you want to unmute yourself, we can move ahead and we've got time for questions again at the end. Thank you, Dave, for all of those.
Sure.
We have still a few minutes before noon, or before 1. So just wanted to remind again that the summer field day in person again, Wednesday, August 11th at Whittlesey Cranberry Company. You know, it's a lovely operation. I've, as Alex said, enjoyed working with Robert to put the tour together. We also will have mini clinic presentations from Leslie, from Joshna, and so that'll be your first opportunity to meet them, in person at these public events. From myself, and then Dave and Christina are going to be presenting as well. So the mini clinics, I believe, run 9:30 to 11:30 through that day, but the whole day. Alex, does it start at 9 proper, or at 8:30?
The event starts at 8:30 for registration and the trade show and the marsh tours and those items.
And yeah, I'm extremely looking forward to actually getting to face-to-face meet so many of you all at once. So deeply looking forward to it. And then we, again, will take off September and October from our education, regular programming for harvest. Hopefully you will, there we go. And then our next brown bags will come back again in November. And I do already have the date set of November 19th and December 17th. It was popular last year when we had our nationwide roundup. And the thought was that we could have a West Coast roundup and an East Coast roundup for those November and December brown bags. As you get to hear from our Wisconsin experts all growing season long, checking in with the research and the new directions that people on the coasts are taking. And if you have particular researchers that you would like to hear from or topics that you're really curious about that's going on, please send me an email or send me a text and let me arrange the speaker lineup to be what's most interesting to you.
Allison, can you go to presentation mode so we can see that a bit bigger?
I have tried that a couple of times and it has stubbornly failed to do it. So
I see. Sorry about that. Then you gotta. Oh, it worked.
Happened. All right. Very good. So the prior information, I'm sure Alex has sent you several times, the August 11th at Whittlesey, Cranberry, and Cranmore, and then November 19th and December 17th are our next virtual brown bags of the season. We do at fruit.wisc.edu, there's an events calendar, and the registration links are already live there. I will be setting up the speakers in the coming months, so happy to take direction on those fronts. It looks like we've had a couple more questions come into the chat, and as I wait for the chat to load, I'll again say, Alex made that nice survey that you can either do anonymously or you can add your name to get in the drawing for a Cranberry's hat. We are, always wanting to do better, and have seen kind of participation is up sometimes and down other times, and we feel like the content's kind of, hopefully very useful for you, but give us feedback on how we can make the content more useful, or if we need to change the timing, or what makes this best for your world. I kind of like the questions of a live session as opposed to a podcast, but if podcast availability is better, give us your thoughts. We want to make things as good as possible. And maybe these chats will load.
Did you see that last question about the best timing for fall post-harvest moss control applications?
Alex, this is Jed. It looks like maybe Allison, I'm not sure if her audio is working, but I'll jump in and just try to answer that. So the timing is really rather fluid and a wider window than what we would have for most pests in that case. But there are a couple of key things to keep in mind. Number one, anything that you're doing to control a plant needs to control a plant that's active in growth. So something that's dormant or no longer growing, don't expect to control it. The other key piece, though, really is that most of these are just kind of a temporary suppression. We have not found anything that gives long-term moss control. So whatever one chooses to apply, just keep in mind that it's likely, should we get into wetter conditions, that it'll persist and regrow. But the actual application timing itself, this is, moss grows slowly and it's been around for a while when it's there. So it has a fairly broad window in that case. Actively growing, and again, set your expectations reasonably. It'll be back.
Thank you, Jen. All right, Allison, we can see you and hear you again. Well, I thought for a moment we may have lost her here for the duration of the call here at the end, but that's okay. I think that we have gotten through all of the presentations and addressed all of the questions in the chat.